Hello, very welcome to the respectful Net Theatre channel, online, digital. My name is Martina Decker. I am a scholar in media studies and theatre studies. My topics are digital cultures, critique in digital cultures, and theatre and digitality. I'm very happy to welcome you to our first talk today. Today is the 13th of May 2021, and we are at 4 p.m. in German time and 7:30 p.m. in India time. I just want to explain a little bit what it's all about, this respectful theatre, net theatre channel, online, digital. Our project has three aims. Firstly, we intend to understand the role of theatre and performance during the ongoing conversion of human history into the technological, today so-called post-human conditions of digital cultures. Secondly, we want to comment on this development through playful interventions and also through theoretical inputs. We are not interested in criticism on plays or productions, but on the emergence of new formats, concepts, and aesthetics of digitality in theatre and performance. Thirdly, the Net Theatre channel itself is a fast format with and in the tools of our digital cultures. The focus is not on just talking about the digital in performance, but rather to refer to it in a digital way. These aims are unfolded in three series. First, aesthetics of digital theatre online and on stage. Second, thinking about theatre and digitality. And third, states of the internet. And with this series, I give over to my colleague Kai Tuchmann.
Yeah, thank you, Martina. So I'm Kai, basically a theater maker, director, dramaturg. And I just want to talk a little bit about this series with the title States of the Internet. What's that about? In general, we think that, Martina and me, we are thinking that in Germany, the discourses around the post-colonial and the digital are not really connected. And this series of talks, the States of the Internet, wants to change this situation by turning its gaze away from the German-speaking theater and instead visiting international artistic practices that do not understand the physical and the digital as opposition. So in general, it seems that the notion of the internet is not so useful anymore and rather destructive, because it suggests that there would be one cyberspace equally accessible to us all, while what we are actually having this is a multitude of cyber governances, a multitude of different regimes of surveillance and surveillance capitalisms. And acknowledging this, we have invited today our guest, the very famous and well-reputed artist Amitesh Grover from New Delhi, with whom we want to try to explore the particularities of the state of the internet in India. And before I pass the word to Amitesh, I just want to introduce him with a few words. Amitesh Grover is an interdisciplinary artist whose works move between visual art, film, installation, and digital art. His practice is aiming for the production of open-ended processes and projects, and his works are anchored in social practice and revolve around themes like absence, presence, staging abandonment, the necessity of remembering, the performance of resistance to keep on living, and how to embody unsayable knowledge. His projects are shown internationally in theaters, galleries, public spaces, and on the internet. He also teaches, writes, curates for performance. And at present, He is professor at National School of Drama, New Delhi, and he teaches interdisciplinary art at universities all around the world. He also has a very fabulous website that you can check out for further and more in-depth information on the large scope of Amitesh's work, and we will provide the link in the comment section to this video. So before I pass it on to you, Amitesh, just a brief about the structure of today. So we will have Amitesh now for 15-20 minutes unpacking his approach towards the cyber performative for us. And he will do this by discussing one of his most recent works called The Last Poet. And this discussion and this unpacking will be followed by a 15-minute conversation with me about the particularities of the state of the internet in India. And after this, we will eventually include Martina for another 15 and 20 minutes. So all in all, we attempt to have our conversation for about 60 minutes. So having all this said, without further ado, Amitesh, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Kai and Martina. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in conversation with you, and also hello to your audiences. This is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful project that both of you have initiated, the Respectful Net Theatre channel online.digital, and I cannot be more delighted to be the first guest on this channel. So thank you so much for inviting me. It is quite punctual to think about these questions, about the analog and the digital, about what this post-pandemic world has done to theatre and to performance, because we know that it has, the pandemic and the virus has changed our bodies. And it has changed our bodies in ways that we will still be trying to understand for months and years to come. It has changed relationships. It has changed our idea of what does it mean to be close to someone, physically close, to touch, to breathe each other. There is a change in the way our relationships, with the way we think about relationships, and the way we think about gatherings, when people gather, how we gather. It has been more than a year that I have been part of a crowd in a physical way. And this has happened to several of us, I think to most of us, for the first time in our lives, that we have been away from other bodies for this long. And the only way that we have been able to be co-present in each other's lives is through the internet, through digitality. And I think that a year of gathering online and of meeting each other online, of talking to our parents and our friends and our cousins, of witnessing and experiencing the world through the screen is changing us in deeper ways. It's changing us in philosophical ways and in political ways and in aesthetical ways. And because we practice theater, the three of us, we think about theater, we do theater, it has also changed the way I have thought about theater. So today I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the questions that I have been facing, how it has already changed my practice, and the questions I am still trying to answer, still trying to respond to, that seem very difficult at present, but I hope to find answers to them as we go forward. Before I begin, I just want to say two things. The first is that the kind of crisis we are going through is not just extremely tragic, um, and not just unbearable in terms of the loss that, especially in India at present, that we are experiencing. But it is also a watershed moment to rethink history. Um, and I think this is what moments of crisis do. They change the way we think about history. We are in this moment in which we look back at the ways we have thought about theatre. And we also try and change the definitions of how we have thought about it. The way theatre was understood a few years ago may not be useful for us today. And the way we understood performing bodies before may not be useful for us today. And so we can not just think about the future, but also look back and think about the past. And try and see if we can define it in different ways. Try and see if we can think about it in different ways. So we're going to take this current moment as a lens with which we just don't look at future, but a lens that we turn back on history as well. I'm saying this particularly in the light of the debate between analog and digital, the debate between physical and online theatre, and how up till now we have thought about these terms as binary opposites, as if there are categories like physical theatre and digital theatre. And I hope to kind of demolish these binaries as we talk today and try and see if we can look at the area in between these binaries and complicate this matter, problematize this opposition a little bit. And the second is that borders have become meaningless in today's time. They were meaningless even before the pandemic hit us, of course, but they have become even more meaningless today because as we have seen that the virus does not respect borders. It hops borders, it hops countries and cultures and different religions and races. It does not respect the categories that social sciences have created for us. And in that way, I think art going forward may also need to disrespect borders and look at the aesthetics and the politics of interdisciplinarity a little more closely to see what happens when artists, artworks, intentions, collaborations get transcend borders, get across borders. What is this new kind of work that we are about to make, that the world that we're about to step into? With these two thoughts in mind, I will now, I think I'll share my presentation for today. Theatre in the Age of Cyberculture, Performing with Our Bodies, Performing with Code. Like I said, that bodies have changed through this virus. My understanding of how the body behaves when a virus like COVID hits us and how unpredictable this disease is and what it makes the body do has philosophically changed the way I have been thinking about bodies. Of course, the idea of the virus and virality is not just a biological one, but it is also a digital one. When we talk about the digital culture, we also talk about virality. We talk about memes going viral, fake news going viral. We talk about rumors and scandals going viral. And how this virality also affects and sabotages communities and truths and different ways in which politics has been established. So the code that assembles and encourages these kinds of digital viralities and the political structures that are unfolding this, that are sort of responsible for the unleashing and unfolding of the biological virus that, especially in South Asia, especially in India, that we are experiencing, to my mind, have a link. They're linked in some way. And therefore, today when I talk about cyber culture, I will not just talk about the aesthetics and the form of it, but I also tend to open up the politics of cyber culture and what this means to us in the theatre world. The specific work that I want to begin with is called The Last Poet. I made this work last year. I started to think about this work after the lockdown was imposed in India. The lockdown was imposed in March 2020, and I started to think about this work in June 2020, so a couple of months after the lockdown was imposed. And this work was inspired, of course, by the kind of crisis that started unfolding in India after the lockdown was imposed, but also not just the biological crisis, not just the medical crisis. India is a huge country, but the healthcare system is not satisfactory. And by the coming of this virus, by the coming of this disease, the healthcare system suffered a kind of burden, a kind of expectation that it could not live up to, and it collapsed entirely. It collapsed entirely last year, and it's collapsed miserably again, and on a much wider scale this year. But as the government and the medical sector was trying to address this crisis, another kind of crisis started to unfold, and that was a political one. Not just India, but several South Asian countries found in this crisis an opportunity to unleash a kind of political war against its dissenters. Within a couple of months of having announced the lockdown last year, the government started arresting dissenters, amongst which were poets, artists, activists, against whom there were kind of surveillances and other kinds of smaller cases that were lodged as part of citizen protests that had taken place before the virus arrived in India. One of the things that got banned in India right after the lockdown was public assembly, which practically banned all kinds of physical support and protests that are a regular affair in India. And that is one way in which artists and activists and political thinkers are able to exert pressure on the government and also on the international community to respect human rights and to keep democracy alive. When this right of public assembly was taken away, this became an opportunity for the government to come down hard on pending cases of political dissenters, and they started being rounded up and being put into jail. Within a couple of months, we had writers, poets, activists, young students who were still studying in universities, picked up and without a proper trial, being thrown into jail. Amongst these was one of a very famous poet called Varvara Rao from south of India, He's 82 years old, and he was also picked up and thrown into jail. And while I was reading about this, and while through common friends and uh, colleagues, this worry about what is happening to our country started to increase tremendously, I started to think about this work called The Last Poet. And this work is based on research and on interviews and testimonies, on real life accounts. But as I worked with the dramaturg, it started to take a slightly more fictional turn. I knew that this work had to be entirely online because I wanted to premiere this work in 2020. And this work was very generously supported by the Serendipity Arts Foundation, which is a very important art foundation based in Delhi. A theatre of love, a city of sorrow, a people searching for their missing poet. The Last Poet attempts to capture a political moment. A poet disappears, a virus spreads within and amongst us, and our world becomes haunted. The audience is invited to immerse themselves in the constancy of this virtual event. There is a city that is whirling, that is searching for its missing poet, listless yet hungry, moving yet remaining still. In The Last Poet, there are multi-loads. There are multiple possibilities in how you can experience this. So I thought of the work as a multi-layered art form with theatre, film, sound art, creative coding, digital scenography, and live performance. And the narratives that got featured in The Last Poet dealt with feelings of anonymity and estrangement from a city that has turned extreme. This work premiered at the Serendipity Arts Festival, and it was interdisciplinary in nature. It had a massive team that slowly came together. And when I started to think about this project, I needed to think about what is the space of the internet. Now, if you remember, if you sort of followed the debates and the evolution of the internet from the late 80s to the 90s and then 2000s, we have already seen two different versions of the internet, Internet 1.0 and then Internet 2.0. A lot of young people who use the internet today know the internet only through social media and through software apps. But I belong to a world in which social media was not there. And this entire industry of apps and software wasn't there. It was an experimental place in the 90s, Internet 1.0. It was a space that was full of possibilities. It had infinite freedoms. And it was a space which was not yet a place. And when I say this, I mean it in the example that I take is this wonderful paragraph from a book called Trickster City, Writings from the Belly of the Metropolis, which is edited by Shweta Sharda. She's an Indian art curator and writer. And this paragraph is quite interesting from this book. A place is nishastha, is where the gaze has not yet been fixed and time has not yet been disciplined, where nobody has yet been described as a vagabond. When a space loses its nishastha, it condenses into jaga, which means place. By then, it has moved through its processes of working out what it wants to remember and what it wants to forget, who it wants to keep in and who to keep out, which ways of being it finds acceptable, and which are the ways it shuns or tries to stay away from. In a philosophical way, the journey of the web from 1.0 to 2.0 is this journey from nishastka to jagah, from space to place, from a space that was open to all kinds of possibilities and memories to a space that has forgotten some parts and only wants to remember other parts. And this for me is one of the big losses of Web 2.0. And I wanted this project to actually sort of tap into the freedoms of Web 1.0 and see what we can, if we can conjure the freedoms of that time of the 90s. So I started to collaborate with a wonderful set of programmers and coders, and we called our process poetic instancing and generative collaborations. We started to create generative worlds for the last poet. In the beginning, we identified that it was important for us to work with code that was generated, in the sense that when you write code, that it does not limit and illustrate a space, but it begins to write rules or parameters of a space. And it generates that space depending on the time and place and the immersion of whoever is trying to access the space. In a certain sense, I mean, this is the internet. Depending on where you are and how you access it, you are taken to, you knock at a different door of the internet. And so not everybody is standing in front of the same door. Not everybody is at the same point within the internet. And I wanted to think about a word for the last poet that is generative and instanced in this way. And I started with where I live. So on the left, the amber, peach, orange kind of apartment buildings that you see is where I live. This is the view from my 5th floor balcony. And this became this architecture and these boxes. Some of them seem to be floating in mid-air, became the inspiration for trying to think about a South Asian imagination of what this virtual world could look like. And this photograph then led to these kind of architectural drawings. There were other kinds of inspirations that came in terms of paintings and sketches. And then slowly we started to write the code. Now on the left, you see the code. This is a software called P5, which is quite a commonly used software for generating 3D worlds. And on the right, you see a very fundamental, a very essential kind of world that it is generating. We wanted to sort of we wanted this world to carry resonances of arches, of Indo-Islamic architecture, of tombs, of roundness, of these crowded and clusters kind of cities that we live in, which are not neatly arranged in grids, you know. And we wanted this virtual world to carry resonances of our own reality. And I had also extensively photographed Delhi during the months that we have the highest pollution levels. And when the pollution levels go bizarrely high, and there is a government advisory to stay inside that gets announced, there is an orange kind of an amber kind of a haze that the entire city gets filled with. And so because I had photographed it extensively, that amber haze became the palette of this world. So as we started to sort of develop it further and further, this is what it began to look like. There was this world had haze, this amber polluting haze. There were sort of buildings and boxes that were going away from the audience, and there were other buildings that were coming towards the audience. This world doesn't have gravity, so everything is up in the air and everything is whirling. It's almost like a slow-moving storm that you are inside, and all elements of your urban world, like street lamps and benches and cycles, wires, all of it is unhinged. And so the audience is actually invited into the eye of the slow-moving storm. And the elements inside are all clickable, they're interacting with the audience. So you can move your cursor, hover your cursor above these elements, and then click on one of these boxes, and you are taken into these rooms. Now, what do you find inside these rooms? You meet live performers inside these rooms who are waiting there for you. And the moment you enter, they begin their performance, they begin their scene. And as you listen to these performers, as you navigate between one room and another room, you realize that everybody is talking about this one character. This one character who has gone missing. This character is a people's poet. Everybody knows him. Some characters know him very closely. Some are his family and his friends and colleagues, and others who have known him as a neighbor or as a stranger. And each one of these characters is sort of presenting, is talking to you about this character, about the poet who's gone missing. Throughout the piece, you never meet the poet. So everybody seems to be talking about the poet, but you never meet the poet. At the center, the protagonist of the world is missing. And you only have to, as an audience member, you can only try and imagine and put all these testimonies and these accounts together to imagine this poet. Now, as you go in and out of rooms, there are choices that you need to make as an audience member. The first choice that you need to make is whether you want to stay in that room or not. So every few minutes, on the left side, on the left bottom, there is a button that appears that says leave. It appears for 1 minute. If you click on it, you leave the room. If you don't click on it, you stay inside the room and the button disappears. And you don't know when that button is going to come back again. So you're stuck inside the room till the button reappears. And this is the only way in which you can leave rooms and enter rooms. When you click on leave, you're taken outside into this whirling city. You again have to navigate across the city. The city is moving and whirling around you, and you click on another room, and then you go inside. And there's another sort of performer waiting for you. Sometimes you get surprised. Sometimes it's not a performer, but a film. There's a running film that's, and this is one of the films. This is one of the films that people see, and what you see here is a collection of archival footage of India at the turn of the 21st century. Much of the footage that you see here is politically contested today. And when it appears on the internet, it is quickly taken down. Because a lot of the footage is politically quite incendiary. People who know about South Asian history, when you look at this footage, you immediately know that some of the clips that are being shown here are actually extremely politically extremely threatening towards the regime that is in power today. And sort of working with these clips and finding within this show a room that is tucked somewhere, which is not easily spotted, and to go inside and to be able to watch this film, and before you know it, the film is over and you have to leave the room, is for me an artistic strategy to be able to house this film and to protect it from erasure in the online world. You again sort of come back out, you go into other rooms where other characters are waiting for you, and all the performers are live. And they're performing from their own houses. We made this show in lockdown, so all actors actually turned their houses into these little performance venues, whitewashed walls behind them, created theatrical corners inside their rooms, and rehearsed and then did the shows. And the other kind of interaction that the audiences needed to do was that every time a scene got over, there was a poll that appeared on the screen. And this poll had titles of other scenes that they could vote on. And this was an instant poll. It appeared for a minute. And as the audiences voted for which scene they want to watch next, the voting percentage of the audience appeared as well. And this was visible to the audience as well as to the performers. And the scene that got voted the most then got performed by the actor. And this happened in almost every room that audiences went into. These are cryptic titles, these are mysterious titles. You just see the title, you don't know what these scenes or these stories are about. So you only have this information to go by when you click on the poll. And every now and then, as these scenes got over, the audience, the performers also gagged themselves up and refused to continue with their performance till the audience actually voted and told them which scene to perform next. And so this is a collage of the different kinds of characters and visuals that were part of the show. And it was a 90-minute show, and at the end of the 90 minutes, everybody was thrown out of wherever they were, and they left this virtual world and were taken to the beginning of this world. And this is just to give you sort of an illustration of what the backstage looked like. How was the team kind of controlling this entire show from the backstage? Like in the theaters, we have the green room, the wings, the control rooms, the lighting booths, etc. We had to think of a digital corresponding space and a way to run the show. So we created this called the Stage Manager Dashboard. So on the left, we have the space for uploading all the audiences that booked tickets with their email IDs and contact information, and that list got uploaded. So we had the names and email IDs of everybody who had registered for the show. Then we had the start show button. Right in the middle, we had the column for all the actors who were live and how many audience members were in each one of the rooms, and when they left, which rooms they went to. So there was a kind of it was like a traffic site. We could see how traffic was moving across this virtual world, across one room and the next and the next. And on the right, we have the column in which we were interacting with the audience. So there was a chat button and a broadcast button, and the audience could get in touch with us if they were facing technical difficulties, and we would reply to them, try to solve the technical difficulties, and also send them small provocations and little couplets and poems in the middle, so that it was not just the screen and the performer who was performing, but the little chat icon was also asking provocative questions and sending them and poems and couplets, which they could click on and read in the middle of the show as well. And in the end, this was the last frame of the show by my favorite Lithuanian American poet called Jonas Mekas. He's a poet and a filmmaker. And this quote of his is quite inspiring for me, which is that in the very end, civilizations perish because they listen to their politicians and not to their poets. And I wanted this to be the parting thought for the audiences as they left the show. So, in short, this was the project. It took us about 7 to 8 months to work with a large team of people. It was the first kind of project that I was doing at this scale, and there was a team of programmers, coders, and there were performers, and of course there was a digital scenographer and a dramaturg. And the dramaturg also was quite interesting. It was interesting to work with a dramaturg because the question about how do you write for online works? How do you write for online theater? And if you know from the start that your writing is going to be primarily hosted in an online theater world, does this affect the way you write for theater? And this is the question that the dramaturg tried to answer when she wrote, and she was in constant. She was writing and evolving her dramaturgy in close collaboration with me and with the programmers and the coders, and also with the performers, so that if the code changed and if the possibilities of the code changed, the dramaturgy also got affected by it, and the dramaturgy also changed. And so all these elements were kind of working simultaneously to create this whole work that finally got premiered in December. So I'll stop here. I think I've overshot my time. I've spoken for longer than I planned to. And maybe, open it up to questions that you have, and a conversation that can go beyond this work as well, and talk about digital theater.
Thank you so much, Amitesh, for this really very vivid.
I think you're on mute.
Now can you hear me? Just wait a moment.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, I can.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to thank you, basically, Amitesh, for providing us with this very vivid and very concrete insight view of how to make and how to build cyber theater. That was really fantastic. And in the meantime, you also extended the scope of the series. I mean, it was not just about the states of the internet, but also the times of the internet, which I also find something very important to think about. Maybe before, or even somehow related to that, before we dive into this aspect of temporality, maybe could you tell us a little bit more about audience? I mean, who is the audience? What are audience reactions, especially having in mind what you said, that there might be a generational gap of people having experienced the Web 0.0 and just been raised in Web in Web 2.0. Were there any differences in audience reactions regarding age? Yeah, so just this, can you give us an idea of the audience who comes?
I don't know how to answer that question, Kai, because this is a question that is being that has become very profitable for social media companies. This is exactly the question that they try to answer in their own way, and of course, it's an older question of the capitalist world as well, where market survey and audience survey and audience research and who comes to buy the product and what they expect out of the product, and how this product is going to be useful and if they're going to buy it or not, is the 20th century history of capital management, and of sales and marketing in particular. So every time this question gets asked of artists and of theatre makers, it makes me quite uneasy. Is this a question that is a trap? Is it forcing us to think of audiences the way companies and capital and sort of capital labor thinks of audiences, of consumers, of what they consume and how? Or is it a way to actually, in a way in which I think the film industry thinks of audiences, of viewers, which is that which film and which entertainment product will do well in which region. And in India, for example, Bollywood has specialists who look into audience understanding. So they try to include an action scene if the film has to do well in North India. And they try to include songs if the film has to do well in another part of India. And so this is how then the film gets made. And so I often wonder, as an artist, of what value is this question to me?
Maybe
There are two aspects. There are two aspects to the question you asked. One is, of course, the larger philosophical question of how does one define an audience. But the second one is, of course, of accessibility, of how do audiences access this work, and how many audiences access this work. And this has become, how many audiences access this work, again, has become an obsession, I know, of European museums, of American museums, to keep the funding coming, because the only way in which they can justify the funding that comes to them is by actually proving that there is an increase in footfall in the museum, and they're doing people-friendly art, that art that actually sort of is popular and a lot of people come to watch it. So and of course the other aspect of this is functionality. Is that art accessible to people? So I'm going to just talk about the accessibility bit and leave the larger questions of audiences and what audiences are and how can we understand them for maybe follow-up questions later. I was quite clear while making this work that the technology part of it must be politically extremely sensitive and layered, but very accessible. And so I spoke a lot about accessibility with the programmers and coders, and we arrived at this idea, the functional idea that goes around in the app industry today, which is the idea of a one-click interaction, which is that you create an app or a software that actually is just one click away, and you create websites that are just one click away, so that the complication of interaction, which is to look at keyboards or the way virtual reality or virtual gaming players are familiar with, which is the AWDX kind of a moving back and forth and going inside and using the whole keyboard to interact. I was quite clear that I didn't want that for this project, maybe for another project, but not for this one. Just I wanted a world that was that could very easily load across platform, which is that the last word was viewable on mobile phones, on tablets, as well as on laptops and desktops. We tested it very, very extensively on old computers and on new computers, and the accessibility was just one click. So everybody just had to do one click. So if you're familiar with emails, then you could do this. And of course, I always do the mother test, which is that once the piece is ready, I ask my mother to come and experience it. And if she's able to do it technologically, then for me personally, I think that little hurdle of accessibility is crossed. I have to say that digital works are, for me, through experience, I've seen that are far reach many more people at the same time than physical works do. So we had about 200 people per show. We did 4 shows. We could reach 800 people. And next month, we are doing a span of 10 shows with an increased capacity of 300 people per show, which means that we will be reaching 3,000 people over 3 weekends. And this means that 3,000 people from all across the world, and not just from Delhi. So in terms of its accessibility, digital works are, I think, more accessible than physical works are, because of sheer numbers and also because they don't rely on physical proximity to come and watch the work. And therefore, I think they become even more difficult to talk about what kind of audiences are coming to watch this work, because I simply can't see them. Nobody can see them, unlike the theater where the audience is sitting right in front of you, and you can sense the audience, even if they are sitting in the dark. In a digital work, it's virtually impossible to get a grip on who is your audience that's coming in, which for me is also a liberating condition to be in, because I don't want to know the audience that's coming in to watch the work.
So just to elaborate a little bit on the background of the question, or the intention of my question was that I thought it might be useful to talk about the audience, to unpack a little bit the whole theatrical public sphere, or the ecology of the public in which the last poet was placed. And now already we heard something in terms of numbers, so 800 and 3,000 people more to come. And although, I mean, you can not see the audience, which I totally understand, but still you do communication, right? Or the festival does communication, so actually I'm not having this managerial take on who is the audience and how to track them and how to increase the performance of the output, but rather I tried with asking the question to get a better understanding of the let's say the theatrical public sphere for which this piece was created. So to who comes and listens to this offer and takes this suggestion that you make. And also, having worked myself with digital technologies, I made some surprising experiences that people who actually tend to love theater are often very shocked when it comes to the digital, and the digital for, let's say, classical theater goers might be a barrier, and it's hard to work around that. Yeah, so that's I mean, did you so that was one kind of thought. And but staying a little bit with this idea of the theatrical public sphere, I mean, it's audience, it's the production itself. You also mentioned the festival which produced it. Also, theater criticism would belong to that. Can you talk us a little bit through all these aspects? So what was it for a festival, for the people who don't know, the Serendipity Arts Festival, where this was placed? Is it a digital festival, or is it, so what is it for a kind of a festival? And yeah, also what kind of already existing experience does an audience have that is addressed by this festival with digital works? So just to get a little bit more understanding of the theater ecology in which you place this piece, and then of course in how far the digital itself was also or could also facilitate an extension beyond the borders of this theatrical public sphere. So that's a little bit I would like to know a little bit more about.
I think the question of the festival is best asked to the organization that did the festival, because I think they have a broader view of not just the work that I created, but also the work that you and Anuja created for the same festival, and several other works that went up online, which were not necessarily theatrical. And I think this is important to understand, because not all audiences come in with these strict disciplinary borders of that I'm going to watch a theater show online, or I'm going to actually interact with a virtual reality piece online, or am I going to go to an art website and see if something happens there, you know? Because I think what the online world is doing is that it's demolishing borders between theater, visual art, film, and online streaming. We have so when I create work, it is being watched on the same screen as everybody watches Netflix, for example, or everybody shops on Amazon, or it's the same medium, it's the same screen, it's the same keyboard and the mouse, right? So I'm no longer in a space in which it is exclusively reserved for theater, like the theater buildings are, right? So the 20th century, the late 20th century was a very safe place for theater, in the sense that the venue of theater, the audience that came to watch theater, the discipline of theater, the training of theater had very clearly defined physical, philosophical, political parameters. And it's within that a lot of experimentation happened. But today, we are thrown into the wild. We've changed medium, we've changed venue, we've changed space, we've changed the way we think about our performative bodies in front of this camera and on the screen, and none of us is trained for this. None of us went to theater schools or art schools wanting to, wanting to make works for this kind of a world that we're living in. So we are making a lot of spontaneous judgments and this decisions when we are making work today. And so it's a lot of work that I'm making right now is quite intuitive. It's not it doesn't come with the privilege of very well thought and critically engaged period of contemplation. um, but having said that, I think it's interesting to also keep registering the kind of conditions within which I am making this work. And the condition is that this medium that I'm making work for now is a medium that I cohabit with all other kinds of um, internet-related sort of productions that are taking place. And so the audience of today is an audience that where they are sitting and in what conditions they are sitting is out of my control. Remember that when they come to the theater, we control the way they sit, you know. As directors and creators, we control how they sit, where they sit, in what kind of lighting conditions they sit, for how long they sit. Even small little behavioral, things like somebody getting up in the middle of the show and leaving the show was looked at with a lot of contempt. And today, I don't even know whether somebody is engaging with my work in a continued, focused kind of way, or there are other aspects of their life that are unfolding as they're engaging with my work. So digitality comes with a loss of control. It's you have to, as an artist, I have to understand that there is only so much that I can offer in the form of a artistic proposal, and that there is a loss of traditional control that I must acknowledge when I move from a physical venue of making theater to an online venue of making theater. This has also changed the way actors rehearse, how dramaturgs write. So we had to, when I was rehearsing with the performers, we had to keep inventing acting exercises. We had to keep inventing how they dealt with text. And I thought that I was having to uh, work with three brains at the same time. I was a theater director, I was a film director because I was working with the rectangular screen and the camera all the time. And I was also an internet director, if that there is such a thing, because I was also thinking about how the code was performing and how what is digital assembly when so many people assemble together online for a live show. What does this mean for us? And if there is such a thing as the internet director, who is thinking about, one of my favorite theater writers called Alan Reed uh, had said in one of his books that theater is the last human gathering left. And that's a very interesting quote to keep in mind when we think about the digital theater, because with digital assembly around live events now being a regular affair, uh, what is this kind of a human gathering now, which has moved from physical spaces to online spaces. Um, and we are also seeing audience behaviors. We are seeing a lot of audiences actually. I mean, and I know this from having done the last poet, that the moment the poll appeared online, everybody intuitively knew what to do. You know, there was no instruction about what to click, where to click, but they came response ready. They came, their behaviors were ready to be able to engage with the piece in this way. And I think that is something to keep in mind. Which, I mean, and I think this, I think about this a lot. Which audience behaviors do I want to interrupt and sabotage and invert? And which audience behaviors I want to invite and continue with in the show. And it's, I think, a balance of these two, a sort of a dialogue between these two, that I keep in mind when I create a work. Um, this is perhaps what I would say is the most that I would think about the audience in terms of behaviors, not so much in terms of personalities, histories, cultures, and habits, but in terms of behaviors. And then I can think about interrelational aspects of live theater online, you know, in terms of this kind of a choreography that takes place. Which relationships do I want to respect, and which relationships do I want to destroy and damage through this piece, you know?
While listening to you and thinking about this idea of the digital as causing irritation and creating uncertainties, I had to think about an essay I recently read by a scholar of sociology who was talking about how, especially now in the pandemic, private sites are turning into semi-public sites, and former public sites become something like private sites. I mean, just and he made this point that here in the pandemic, when we're all sitting, and we have this privilege in the West of the home office, so just to stay home, and we're doing all our work partly sitting on the bed and chatting with friends, watching the Netflix, but also doing business there and answering business mails. And so there are total new regimes of working culture and leisure culture initiated by the digital, and a place like the bed that was once the holy place of privacy and intimacy suddenly becomes something from which you work, and something like the street, which was the holy grail of the public space, becomes that where you stroll when you want to have like this 1 hour of privacy that you have in the day. So yeah, that's a very, 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 very interesting thought. So I remember that another work that you did, Amitesh, I mean, because you not only work about and with digital software, but you also went, so to say, one time into the belly of the beast when you worked as an employee for your art project, Kafka's Castle, 6 months long at one of India's biggest tech companies. And I find this project quite interesting, and this is why I want to remember it here right now, because it shifts a little bit the attention from the mere discourse around the digital to the very reality of wage labor that constitutes the digital in the first place. And maybe can you share with us a little bit background of this project, and also, can you tell us a little bit how this perspective of being part of the wage labor that is associated with the digital, how this change of perspective affected you as a person even, and how it has affected your work as an artist for sure?
Yeah, it's a, thank you for mentioning that project. It's a pretty extensive project, so I don't know for how long I will be able to. I don't think we have the time to actually
Yeah.
talk about that project in detail. Maybe we can find another opportunity to do it. But in short, yeah, like you mentioned, we all seem to be obsessed with what is in front of us, which is the screen and the internet and apps and
No.
websites. But there is there are millions and millions of software workers who are working to keep this digital world up and running. And as the whole world knows, the maintenance industry of the digital world of the internet is India. And when it's like when you check into a hotel, the hotel looks very glitzy and full of glamour. But then you go to the hospitality section, and that's where everything is being washed and cleaned and ironed and sanitized and then put back up. And that is what is keeping the hotel running. It's the same is with the maintenance and the hospitality part of the internet. Um, and a significant amount of maintenance labor comes from India, actually. So there are these two or three fairly enormous tech companies in India, which do the maintenance work for big sites like Amazon, banks, lots of websites that are maintained in the name of banks, etc. A lot of financial transactions that take place, and also the hardware labor of actually keeping the servers up and running, and how to look after server farms that are placed across the world. Um, as we know that a site can go down just by a, a small fan not working well in a server sitting somewhere in a Scandinavian country. And if that fan is working well or not, a tech uh, worker sitting somewhere in India would know about. So, so what's happening with the internet is that the design part and the capital generation part is with the West, but the cleaning part and the maintenance part is with Asia and with India. And that is what I wanted to actually go and investigate through an art project. So as an artist, I got commissioned to create this project in which I camouflaged myself as a software worker and entered um, as a regular wage worker in one of the biggest software companies in India, and I started to go and work there every day. And in my contract, there was a two-tier contract that I had with the company. The first tier was that I would work, I would be on wages, and I would work just like a software worker. I would learn the work, I would perform the work, and after my working hours got over, the campus, the sort of the office space of the company would be available to me to create performative gestures, and which I would be allowed to record in any way that I deemed fit. And so this I did for 6 months. I created different kinds of performances. I created performative interventions, created a short film, um, created a series of photographs. I intervened into their CCTV and surveillance networks and left coded messages.
No. It was really it's really an amazing project. And I just say the name again. It's Kafka's Castle, like Franz Kafka and Kafka's Castle. And like I said, right, so there is this amazing website of yours where you can look it up. And also Anuja Gosakar and me, we once did a symposium called Connecting Realities. There's a website, connectingrealities.org, where Amitesh presented this project quite in depth. So for the people who want to use links to get a better and a very vivid understanding of these projects. I just want to pay attention to one detail, because when you presented the Kafka's Castle in this Connecting Realities, you talked about the first day of your work at this company. So you attended something, I think it was the official induction day. You talked about how there was a company representative giving a speech during this induction day, or for the induction day. And you emphasized that these guys, like him, are regularly visiting theater workshops, because obviously performing one's company is a very serious business. So you have to train. And also to fill in Martina now a little bit as a scholar on the notion of performance and the dispositive that performance has become. So it seems that wage labor has acquired more and more the capacity of artful performances, and that performativity itself becomes a dispositive that encompasses computer science, management, wage labor. And having this in mind, what is, Amitesh, your feeling about the term performance arts as a term one often used to describe artistic practice? And maybe Martina also can share some ideas about that.
Kai, did you say performance art?
Yes.
Right, okay. No, definitely. The first day when I went into work, we were all being introduced to the company, and I was sitting there with one of my collaborators of this project, Arnika Alda, who's also a German artist, thinker, writer, and curator now, who's been living in India for about 10 years. And so both of us were there, and amongst about 100 other new employees who were being inducted. Now, this company is so large that it inducts 100 new employees every day. And it has been doing this for the last 12 years. And it will continue to do this for the next few years. So you can imagine at the rate at which it is expanding. And so when you have 100 new employees coming in every day and they need to be inducted, you need to give a theatrical performance of the company. So there are these specialist sort of, they introduce the company, they introduce the dream and the aspiration that the company is, and they actually do it from a stage. They built a small theater within the company premises, and so you're invited into that theater. And they have very theatrical entries, they have music, they have lighting, they have professional light designers who and they also have theater people who are coming in to direct this performance, to give them speech skills and movement skills, and to script their introductions and where to give a break and what to emphasize and how to, when they give a break, then what should a video play or a film play, and then how do they come back to resume. And so the entire day, which is called the induction day, is actually a theater play. And on that one day, I thought that ironically, I had swapped places, where I was a theater person who was pretending to be a software employee, and this person in front of me on stage was a software employee who was pretending to be a performer. And our eyes met several times, and we were trying to, look at each other and acknowledge each other's pretense as well, while carrying on with the theater event of the day. And a large part of, I think, a large part of wage labor is also valued in performative terms. So as I went on and discovered later when I started working in the company, they have something called a performance agreement, which is that they have a performance log to fill at the end of the day. Every employee has to do it before they finish their shift. And in this performance log, they write about how many complaints they were able to fix, how many tickets they were able to solve, what problems they were not able to solve, and how they got escalated, and what is the time they spent on each one of these tickets that were coming in from the rest of the world. And they were then scored on this performance every day. And so every day's performance score then led to the monthly performance score. And at the end of the month, they got a bonus or they got less of a salary depending on the performance score they got. So it's not just actors or dancers or musicians who are being judged on their performance. Everybody today, every kind of wage labor today is being assessed on a performance score. And I go back to a very interesting, I think Marx had seen this, because in one of his books, he writes about the comparison between a pianist and a waiter. And he talks about how what is the similarity of labor that both the pianist and the waiter are performing. And he talks about the idea of time, of how that time becomes a measure of the performance of labor, both in an artistic way and in a in a corporate or a capitalist way. And this is one reason that whenever we talk about artistic labor and artistic fee, I refuse to talk about the time that goes into making a project, because for me then time becomes the cage within which we get trapped about thinking about value generation, about what is a value of a work. So sometimes I do, I sometimes projects take much longer, and even though the funding for it is very less, and sometimes the funding of a project is massive and quite ample, and it takes just a very small time to go up. And for me, that's fine. For me, that's a very interesting and unpredictable relationship to have between money and artistic value and what the experience of an artwork is. And for me, this should always remain unstable. They should never settle in the way in which wage labor and time is married. And that was one of the things that I was trying to talk about through my interventions, what I called useless work. So I created useful work as part of my 8-hour-long shifts at the company, and then after my shift ended, I created useless work. And the useless work for me was art that got then presented as part of an exhibition later after my project got over.
Thank you, Amitesh, for bringing this up in more detail. But Martina, is this something you want to respond on?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Amitesh, for the presentation of your work. There's a lot of questions, a lot of things to say, but I will stick to the question of performativity. I think what you described about the performances to bring in the new people every day, this reminds me at the work of Frank Bunker-Gilbreth on Taylorism, working on the efficiency of work, the performativity in the sense of efficiency. on the production line in the period of industrialization. And they also did performances. They had like doing sports. They had mockets, little things to make the movement of their work, to make it more efficient, all about time. To not to give too much of physical force and not to give too much time for working on the production line. And there's like a tradition, I think, in this history of performativity, in the sense of efficiency, and also of technology, technical things, devices to be efficient, to have a certain performance. This is what we said that John Mackenzie is working about. And then there's this more neoliberal aspect to like in startups, hipster culture, perform or else sell yourself, be somebody, which is a completely other aspect and another kind of capitalism, if you want to call it like this. And Karl Marx perhaps was not able to foresee this self exploitation. But I think there's another aspect, and theater and performance had a big role in it, and perhaps also because you mentioned and strengthened the generative aesthetics of software, and the free moments of the internet with Web 1.0, the first web, the web of the 90s, when we all had been happy and doing party about the democracy of the web. So the notion of performativity is very linked then to perhaps what is digital and what is new, which is that we have like this techno-human cooperativity, that we have technology of software algorithms who can do things, who can act, who can decide. And this makes something for us humans, because now we are sharing techno-human cooperation, not in the human and humanistic sense cooperating, but cooperation, operating. This is more important than to bring us together. And I think this, to have this, that there's one side, it is like this, that we are our own power of agency of action is divided with technical things, technical objects. On the other side, it's our discourses. We are talking about it like this. We give agency in our discourses to technology, and we give, and at the same time, we are bringing down our own agency, saying, yeah, we are entangled, we are not the top of the world, the humans, but we are all together and we are intermingled with technology, and this is very correct too. But what I think about is that a shift in the notion of performativity, which came from theater and performance in the 1960s, if we look at it historically, that suddenly, for example, like in the events, the first big events with technology, the experiments in art and technology, the 9 evenings in New York, suddenly with Tudor and John Cage and so on, suddenly things did music, sound, created art stuff. And at the same time, as Tudor said, I'm going behind it, I'm only enabling, I'm only the enabler of the technological performances. So is there something in our notion of performativity that supports in the good and in the bad way? Because there's always, and you mentioned it all, also in your performance about the poet, this is not a free internet, yeah. So it's in a way it's theater as its best, because you explained that in theater the public is not free, and but it is seated, it is exposed to something. So it's not a free space, and it's also a technocratic space. And our notion of performativity since the 1960s, it enables that we could think ourselves as posthuman, as being intermingled with technology, as cooperating with technology, and there's yeah, for the good and the bad. The good is we could imagine a global world, everybody together with each other, because there is no better human than others. At the same time, very technocratic. We are. Yeah, the question is, why do we do all the things we do with technology and social media and so on? We could stop. No, I have other things to do. So yeah, theater and performance has and therefore I think it's so important to have a media aesthetic reflection. Yeah, and this is what I saw in your work on the poet. It was not, now we are in the internet and now we will do something with the internet, but this was a reflection on the internet. It was a reflection on the history of the internet, being a spectator, a participant. It was art and not, oh, now we have to go with theater to the internet. It was a genuine art piece. Yeah, so this notion of what is new in digital culture concerning performativity. It's about techno-human agency, sharing agency, and getting a new kind understanding of being human, having agency or not, being performed all the time by technology, and losing control.
Yeah. So, Amitesh, is there something you want to respond to?
No, I'd agree with absolutely, Martina. Thank you so much for sharing those very insightful analyses and thoughts around techno-human agency, and um, I think these are very important questions to think through, because uh, I do believe that it's through through the work of artists and artworks that um, that we can open up alternatives to these to the answers to these questions. Otherwise, these questions are being answered in a very predictable way by the companies that are making these technologies possible for us. So I would say that artistic intervention is actually for us uh, the way to produce these alternative futures, um, and to propose them to our audiences. Um, I would say that technology is not something new. We have always thought through technology and with technology, and um, my favorite sort of uh, technology philosophers, uh, all of them are agreed on this view that to be human is to be technological in the first place. Because if you I mean, it's interesting that we look at the birth of civilization, we mark it in history uh, at points at which humans started to use tools and to leave a mark on the world around them, whether these were tools to hunt or whether these were cave paintings in French caves thousands of years ago. And so the birth of the civilizational human, or the cultured human, is also the birth of the technological human. Um, and this is one important aspect of looking at the human history, is to actually not look at the human as divorced from technology, but to look at the human as already inclusive of technology. Um, and whether we look at, say, technology philosophers or media theorists, Marshall McLuhan, who would also insist on technology as being extensions of man, um, or of the human body, is that agency is not, I would say that today agency is not being shared between technology or human, but I think the concept of agency uh, has expanded. so that there is the human agency, of course, but now there is also the agency that is sort of shared and delegated to a purely technological apparatus. Um, so we've kind of created more forms of agency, and it was not as if agency was just one thing and that it has gotten divided and shared amongst other new agents that have come. But I think new agents coming have produced more agency. So what we're dealing with today is I would say an expansion of agency, and we don't know what to do. We're trying to think about what to do with it. In The Last Poet, for example, um, there is the agency that I have as the creator, but there is also the agency of the code. There is also the agency of the performers, and there's the agency of the audiences. And all these agencies are sometimes in dialogue with each other, sometimes in contestation with each other, but sometimes also encouraging each other, you know, and producing unpredictable moments or surprises as well. And so in this way, I think maybe this for us is producing a new discourse of what does agency mean, which in conventional theater, the agency always resided with the director, the creator, and the performer. And it resided with them not just in terms of content and how the play will proceed and where the venue of the play is, but also in the sort of this hierarchy of who's above and who's below, who sits down, who watches, and who gets to perform. And it's a and a lot of post 1960s performances rebelled against this hierarchy as well. And I think the digital theater world is going to build on this rebellion. But I think we can do it only if we, as artists, understand that it is not just our agency that is important to think about, but the agencies of all other quote unquote actors, and codes are also actors, and programmers are also actors. And then you have the traditional theater performers as well, and digital scenographers, and what they create is also um, in a sort performing. It's creating a performativity in the online space. um, we have the task of creating new venues on the internet. So we are right now equal parts architects as well as creators of content that goes into this architecture. So, and this is what I keep also sharing with everybody who's creating for the internet, that uh, to think about, not just think about employing softwares that are already out there. So a lot of people who are doing a lot of theater online are using Zoom and other available softwares. Now, these softwares were not created for theater and performance in mind. We are, of course, adapting them, and we are also struggling against them, but they were not created with theater and performance in mind. I think we need to also create virtual architectures with performance and theater in mind from scratch, and build them ground up for us to then imagine performances inside.
So maybe having the time a little bit inside. So we're already now, I think, talking for about 100 minutes instead of the promised 70 minutes. Is there maybe one last thing, Martina or Amitesh, you want to put out there? Otherwise, I would tend to close the conversation. So then I would do this. And yeah, Amitesh, I thank you so much for this so vivid and so concrete insights into your work process, and also how you then unpack them and let us participate in your aesthetic political visions behind these concrete processes. That was fascinating, and that was a wonderful starter for the states of the internet. And I'm also so happy that it was not just the talk about the digital, but that we also touched on the very concrete labor that is behind it. Because I very often have the feeling that, especially in our German-speaking discourse, the digital becomes really something like a new commodity fetish, since we already talked about Karl Marx. So yeah, I think that was a very great course of events, and it was worth these 100 minutes for sure. So I want to close it here. Amitesh, thank you so much for being our first guest in the States of the Internet.
Thank you from my side too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting me. Both of you are absolutely wonderful interlocutors. Really enjoyed this discussion, and all the best with this series. I will surely be an audience of this new channel that you have inaugurated. Congratulations for this.